Laziness isn't a personality trait. It's a chemical state. And the moment you break it, something happens inside your skull that most people never experience in their entire lives. Your brain rewires itself. Not gently. Violently. Neurons that have been sitting dormant for years suddenly fire again. Pathways that atrophied from disuse start rebuilding, like scar tissue forming over an old wound. And for the first few days, it doesn't feel like progress. It feels like war. Most people quit right there. At the exact moment their brain starts to change, they mistake the discomfort for failure and go back to the couch. But the ones who push through? They unlock something the lazy version of themselves will never understand. Here are 7 dark facts about what actually happens inside your brain when you stop being lazy and why almost nobody survives the process. Fact 1. Your brain punishes you before it rewards you. Prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for discipline, planning, and delayed gratification, is metabolically expensive. It burns more energy than almost any other region of your brain. So when you've been lazy for a long time, your brain treats effort as a threat to its energy budget. The first time you try to break the pattern, your brain doesn't send you a reward. It sends you resistance. Cortisol spikes. Your heart rate climbs. A primitive part of your brain, the same part that kept your ancestors alive by conserving energy during famine, starts screaming at you to stop. This is why the first 3 days of any real change feel unbearable. You are not weak. You are fighting a system that evolved over hundreds of thousands of years to protect you from wasting energy. The dark truth is that your own biology is working against your growth, at least at first. Anyone who tells you discipline feels good from day one has never actually done it. Fact 2. Dopamine receptors shrink from comfort then have to rigorithoric. Laziness isn't just a mindset. It's a neurological adaptation. When you spend months or years choosing the easiest, most comfortable option every single time, scrolling instead of working, sleeping in instead of showing up, your brain adjusts its dopamine receptor density to match that lifestyle. Fewer receptors means you need bigger and bigger hits of stimulation just to feel normal. That's why unmotivated people often feel bored, flat, even numb. Their brain has quietly downgraded its own reward system to match a life of minimal effort. When you stop being lazy, you're not just changing your habits. You're forcing your brain to physically regrow receptor density it let go dormant. That process can take anywhere from several weeks to a few months, and during that window, discipline will feel almost joyless. You're rebuilding the machinery for reward from the ground up. Most people never make it far enough to feel the payoff. Fact 3. Your brain starts lying to protect the old version of you. Here's something almost nobody talks about. The brain doesn't just resist new behavior, it actively generates thoughts designed to pull you back to your old identity. Psychologists call this identity protective cognition. Your brain has spent years building a self-image around being the person who rests, who avoids, who takes the easy path. That identity feels safe because it's familiar. The moment you start being disciplined, your brain will generate intrusive thoughts like, "This isn't really you," or "You're going to burn out," or "Why are you trying so hard now?" These thoughts aren't random. They're a defense mechanism, firing from the same neural circuitry that maintains your sense of self. The dark part is that this internal sabotage gets loudest right when you're making the most progress, because that's exactly when your old identity feels most threatened. Fact 4. Willpower is a depleting resource until your brain builds a shortcutter. Hell, research on willpower suggested it worked like a muscle that could get tired throughout the day, a concept called ego depletion. Newer research is more nuanced, but the underlying pattern holds up in practice. Relying on raw willpower to fight laziness is exhausting and unsustainable. Here's the dark twist. If you keep white-knuckling your way through discipline using willpower alone, you will eventually crash. Most people who suddenly give up on a new habit after 2 or 3 weeks aren't lazy, they simply ran their willpower reserves into the ground because they never let their brain build a shortcut. That shortcut is called automaticity, and it lives in a completely different brain region, the basal ganglia, which handles habits instead of decisions. Once a behavior becomes automatic, it stops draining willpower altogether. But getting there requires repeating the behavior consistently for weeks, often in the exact period when it feels hardest and least automatic. Most people quit in that gap right before the shortcut would have kicked in. Fact 5. Your brain's default mode network goes quiet, and that terrifies people, and you're lazy, unfocused, and drifting through your day. A brain system called the default mode network is highly active. It's responsible for mind-wandering, rumination, and self-referential thinking, replaying regrets, imagining worst-case scenarios, comparing yourself to others. When you commit to focused, disciplined action, that network quiets down dramatically. Task-positive brain networks take over instead. This sounds like a good thing, and it is, but the transition itself can feel disorienting. People who've spent years lost in their own heads suddenly find that discipline strips away the mental noise they didn't even realize was keeping them company. Some people describe this as feeling too quiet inside their own mind. It's uncomfortable in a way that's hard to explain, because the constant self-referential chatter, however exhausting, had become familiar. Losing it can feel like losing a part of your identity, even though what you're actually losing is the static. Fact 6. Discipline rewires your threat response to see effort as safe. Under chronic laziness, your amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, starts associating effort and challenge with danger. This isn't philosophical. It's measurable. Studies on avoidance behavior show that repeated avoidance of discomfort strengthens the neural association between effort and threat over time. Every time you choose the easy option, you reinforce that circuit a little more. Effort starts to feel dangerous, not because it actually is, but because your brain has been trained to treat it that way. The process of becoming disciplined requires the opposite kind of repetition. Every single time you do the hard thing and survive it, you don't die, you don't collapse, nothing catastrophic happens. You send a signal to your amygdala that effort is safe. Over enough repetitions, the threat response fades and is replaced by something close to neutrality, eventually even confidence. This is why disciplined people often describe hard tasks as simply no big deal. Their amygdala genuinely stopped treating effort as a threat. Getting there, though, requires surviving dozens of repetitions where it still feels like one. Fact 7. Once the rewiring locks in, you can't go back to who you were with. This is the darkest fact of all, and it's rarely discussed. Neuroplasticity works in both directions, but once new neural pathways are strengthened enough through consistent repetition, they become the new default. The old lazy pathways don't disappear completely, but they weaken from disuse, the same way muscles atrophy without use. This means that people who successfully push through the discomfort of becoming disciplined don't just gain new habits. They lose access to their old comfort zone. The version of you that could sit still for 6 hours without guilt, that could let a day slip by without producing anything, that version becomes neurologically harder and harder to return to. Some people romanticize this as growth, and it is. But it's also a one-way door. Once your brain rebuilds itself around effort, drifting back into laziness will start to feel wrong on a level you can't fully explain, restless, itchy, almost unbearable. You won't just be choosing to work hard anymore. Your rewired brain will demand it. So the real question isn't whether you have the motivation to stop being lazy today. Motivation was never the deciding factor. The real question is whether you're willing to survive the 2 or 3 weeks where your own brain is actively working against you, the resistance, the intrusive thoughts, the silence where the noise used to be long enough for it to rebuild itself into someone who doesn't have to fight for discipline anymore. Most people never find out what's on the other side of that door. If you made it this far, you already have more of what it takes than you think. If this hit something in you, subscribe to Rise with Facts. There's more waiting for you.